As they prepared for battle, both sides were pinning their hopes on Hideaki, positioned on Mount Matsuo. Ieyasu was gambling that Hideaki would defect and join battle on his side. Mitsunari was confident that Hideaki would attack Ieyasu on the agreed signal. Sekigahara was the biggest gathering of samurai in Japanese history.
Hideaki is well placed. If he comes down on us, we're finished.
He won't.
As you wish.
Without his heir, Hidetada, Ieyasu promoted his younger son, Tadayoshi, to uphold the family's honor in combat.
I want you to take Tadayoshi into battle. Look after him. Make me proud.
Would you like to take a look at their front line, Tadayoshi?
The battle began well for Ieyasu's forces. But samurai combat was no longer just a test of sword skill. Cannons and arquebuses, weapons introduced by Jesuit missionaries, played their part. And all the while, Hideaki remained rooted on top of his hill.
Come on, Hideaki. What's stopping you?
Slowly, Mitsunari's men began to prevail.
Bring up the reserves!
And all the while, Hideaki remained rooted on top of his hill.
Come on, Hideaki. What's stopping you.
Slowly, Mitsunari's men began to prevail.
Bring up the reserves! Where's Tadayoshi?
We got separated.
Signal Hideaki. Oh! Up, up!
My lord, that's our signal.
Prepare for a flank assault by Hideaki. Oh!
What is he doing?
What's he waiting for?
He's wavering. He can't decide.
Lord Mitsunari says, you must engage now!
Fire on Hideaki.
Halt! My lord, have you lost your mind? You will bring him down on us.
He has to choose which side he's on. Someone has to make him choose.
He will kill us all.
Then what have we got to lose?
It was an extraordinary gamble, firing on the man that Ieyasu wanted as his ally.
My lord, Ieyasu's cannon!
Prepare to attack.
Do this to me. Hideaki is attacking us.
Ieyasu's decision to fire on Hideaki has entered Japanese legend. He had understood something deep inside the young man's psychology that day. It seems Hideaki's mistrust of Mitsunari and his debt of honor to Ieyasu outweighed any other loyalty, even to his own family. that choice proved decisive for the future of Japan.
You got something to say?
It will keep, my lord.
Okay, so you just had a brief look at a major battle in Japanese history called Sekigahara, and after the completion of the battle, Ieyasu had unified Japan. But in order to understand present-day Japan, we must take a brief look at Japan's history and culture. Humans began living on the Japanese islands approximately 35,000 years ago. Pottery and basic agriculture by 11,000 years is developing. This period is known as the Jomon period, when the Ainu people settled the islands. They're the indigenous or aborigines of Japan. The Japanese Yayoi period, 400 BCE and 250 CE, settlers crossed the Sea of Japan, mostly from Korea, and colonized lower Japanese islands. And remember, Japan is primarily composed of 4 islands, but there are many more islands, and that will be covered later in the slides. Alright, they bring rice cultivation, textile weaving, and bronze castings. Shamanism is introduced to Japan. It becomes the basis of Shintoism. New settlers pushed the Ainu people to northern island of Hokkaido. And here's some artifacts of the Yayoi period. Some dwelling on the left. You see this picture of what they used to live in. At the bottom left-hand corner, you see a pottery, which is one of the early constructions of culture before there is a written language. And we have these other artifacts as well. Medieval Japan. Japan is in this time period a collection of small kingdoms that pay tribute to China. The society slowly becomes more military oriented. Yamato Kingdom emerges as most powerful, and in 538 Buddhism is introduced, which is very important because it impacts their culture, but it also brings in a written language that the Japanese haven't originated yet or developed on their own. So Yamato Japan, their innovations, the introduction of Buddhism from Korea and Confucianism from China. They adopt the Chinese pictogram, which is the written language. You have the establishment of family or clan-based governments. And in the Nara Heian Japan, 1711-85, you have a high point of classical Japanese literature and poetry. It establishes the Japanese emperor as divine, a god on earth. If you recall, when we were watching The Last Samurai together in class, the daimyo, or the shogun of Japan's thoughts towards the emperor was that he was God, and that was the respect that was given to him. Even up to World War II, the people viewed the emperor as God. The capital is moved to Kyoto. The influence of China and Japan begins to decline. Shinto becomes the Japanese religion. Beginning in the 800s, the Japanese organized their older folk religions into a new religion known as Shinto, Way of the Gods. Temples are known as pagodas, like the one you see in the lower right-hand corner. And you have the polytheistic, with the belief in spirits, kaimi, and honoring the dead. Most Japanese are both Buddhist and Shinto. You have the rise of the shogun and samurai. Clan warlords, or daimyo, become powerful and take over running Japan. The shogun rules the bushi. That's the warrior classes, known as the samurai. In 1185, you have the Yoritomo shogun unites Japan under a single shogun. They're able to repel a Mongol invasion in 1272 and 1281 with help from the kamikaze. The kamikaze was basically a typhoon. It just happened to be the case when the Mongolians were launching an invasion to invade Japan, that these typhoons came and wiped out the entire Mongolian invasion. And this didn't just happen once, it happened twice. And so the Japanese thought the gods were on their side by aiding them with the kamikaze. And this would also be the nicknames for their fighter pilots in World War II for a Japanese kamikaze who, after he drops his bombs, and he would just, crash his plane into a naval ship, or U.S. naval ship. Then you have the Shogun era of Japan, and you have some of these artifacts. In the upper right hand corner you have a depiction of a Shogun leader, and in the lower left hand corner you see a Shogun on a horse directing, and these other classical images of the Shogun era. Feudal Japan, 1185-1844. You have power transfers to local warlords, those are the daimyos. They're in near constant warfare with each other. In 1543, a Portuguese ship loaded with guns lands in Japan and introduces firearms. And you see in the lower right hand corner, you have this matchlock. And basically you light the fuse, and it takes time, and once the fuse gets to the base of the gun, it triggers and fires. Okay, and then we have the Battle of Sekigahara, which is the video that you saw earlier. It's the massive battle that included 20,000 gun-using troops. The firearms were banned in Japan after the battle. Too many samurai are killed. You gotta remember, in order to be samurai, you must be born in the samurai family. This was part of the class system in feudal Japan. It's also important to note that one of the most famous warriors in the history of the world, Miyamati Musashi, was also fighting this battle as a spearman. He used the yari, and you'll see a clip of him on my website later. Arrival of the Europeans. 1600s. European traders and missionaries arrive. Shoguns and warlords distrust the Europeans, and this is also, you can also see a depiction of this in a classic Japanese movie called Shogun, and you can see this distrust of Europeans. In 1637, the Japanese Christians revolt and are crushed. Europeans ordered out of the country. Japan closes its borders. Yeah, the arrival of the Americans. July 8th, 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry arrives in Edo Bay and demands Japan open its ports to U.S. shipping. Perry commands the Chirofun, black ships. Gunboat diplomacy and the Meiji Restoration. Shock of contact with the advanced U.S. warships triggers reform in Japan. U.S. used its military power to force the Japanese government to comply. This becomes known as gunboat diplomacy. Modernization programs in the military launched based on Western technology. The feudal daimyo system is abolished. And also, if you recall, the gunboat diplomacy was used in Korea to get Korea out of their isolation. And when China seized the opium and kicked out the British launched their expeditionary force to go to China and force them to open up trade and to continue to receive the opium. The market economy is introduced to Japan. In the 20th century, Japan wins the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, the first Asian nation to defeat a European power. Now, the Russo is an abbreviation or short name for Russians. They expanded during World War I. The military takes control of government. In the 1920s, Japan becomes an aggressive military state. They are the co-prosperity sphere. Japanese plan for an Asian and Pacific empire, and part of this plan is to expand west into China and in areas of Manchuria where there is fuel and oil reserves that they can use to fuel this Japanese war machine. And they wanted to expand east to knock out the Americans and carve out their own vast empire. Japan's military. They live by the code of Bushido, to never give up, never dishonor, and never surrender. They see themselves as modern samurai. This makes them difficult opponents in fighting in the Pacific during World War II. The entire economy is built, the whole Japanese entire economy is built to support the war effort. World War II, the Pacific Theater. Japan joins an alliance with Germany and Italy. They become known as the Axis powers. They invade China in 1937, Indochina in 1940. They attack the USA on December 4th in 1941, and they are defeated by the Allies in the Pacific. They're forced to surrender after 2 atomic bombs dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. There was actually a coup that was planned where a Japanese soldier did not want to surrender, a Japanese general, and they tried to assassinate the emperor to prevent this from happening. However, the coup was stopped, and the general ran away, and the Japanese eventually surrendered anyways, especially at the warnings that the Russians were going to try to invade as well. So, rebuilding of Japan. After the war, Japan is occupied by the U.S. USA helps fund the rebuilding of Japanese industries to prevent communism. One of the things about fighting in wars is once you defeat the power, like in Iraq, now you have the troubling issue is, well, who's going to go and step in? So if the United States just went and demolished Japan and just left it to itself, there's also the threat that the Russians might try and invade and conquer and have control of Japan. So the U.S. stays and helps the rebuilding of Japan. So that's one way you try to avoid this vacuum of power. So, small Japanese companies like Toyota and Sony, as well as large Japanese companies Mitsubishi and Suzuki, recover quickly and expand to non-military goods, cars, radios, and consumer products. Japan's post-war economic boom. Japan recovers quickly and soon moves into the new electronic industries, TVs, radios, stereos, later CDs and DVDs, etc. They expand into heavy industries, steel, shipbuilding, trucks and cars, and dominate in these fields. Japan has a comparative advantage, a well-skilled and educated workforce, and a geographical location where it's centered to the USA, Australia, Indonesia, India, as well as China and Russia. By the 1980s, Japan is the second largest economy on Earth and a major U.S. trade partner. Now, life in a crowded country, you see in the right-hand corner of this picture that this is a Japanese pool, and it is packed. Tokyo is one of the world's most crowded cities. It is the capital of Japan. Population density. A country's population density is the average number of persons in a unit of area, such as the square mile. The higher the number is, the more crowded the country. If you remember our Monsoon Asia maps, the population density did not exceed 250 per square mile. Or you had to pick the purple square, which told you it's 250 or over. And Japan, in 2004, the population density of Japan was 880 persons per square mile. In comparison, the United States had only a population density of 83 persons per square mile. This means that Japan is almost 11 times as densely populated as the United States. Here's a geographic setting. Japan is an island nation with 3,900 smaller ones. Japan enjoys a moderate climate. Summers are warm, winters are relatively mild, with heavy snowfall limited to the northern islands. Plenty of summer rainfall makes Japan an ideal place for growing rice and other crops. And so you see in the picture, you have the lime or green color, and this is the humid subtropical climate. And then you see this pink color, which is the humid continental climate, and then the very dark purple, which is the subarctic climate. And you'll see that it's specifically in the northern island of Sapporo. 3/4 of Japan is made up of mountains. Mountains were formed with tectonic plates that collided deep beneath the sea. Volcanoes welled up in the cracks between the plates, and over millions of years, liquid flowing rock from the volcanoes built up into mountains. Mount Fuji is the highest and most famous volcano. Its snow-capped cone towers above the city of Tokyo. The tectonic plates that built up Japan are still pushing against each other. Whenever one of them moves, the ground shakes. Small earthquakes happen almost every day in Japan. Undersea, earthquakes sometimes trigger huge sea waves called tsunamis. Only about 1/8 of Japan is arable land, or land that is suitable for farming. The rest is too hilly to plow and plant. The amount of arable land affects population distribution, or where people live. Japan has about 127 million people. Nearly all of them live on the four main islands of Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. And then here you can see the vegetation that is, or the land utilization of Japan. You have, in the red shaded areas, you have the double cropping, paddy, rice dominant with wheat and barley as dry crops. In the beige color, you have single cropping, which is primarily paddy rice. In the yellowish color, you have single cropping, chiefly wheat, barley, and oats. And then the green areas, forests, and then are dominant with some pasture and wasteland. So how crowded is Japan? Geographers measure density in two ways. The first is arithmetic population density. It compares the number of people to a country's total land area. Japan's arithmetic population density is about 880 persons per square mile. And then there's another way, another measure, which is physiological population density, which is calculated by dividing the number of people by the amount of arable land. And arable land just means usable land. So Japan's physiological population density is about 7,219 persons per square mile. By this measure, Japan is about 17 times more crowded than the United States. Population density affects transportation. The average commute time in Tokyo is an hour and a half each day. This adds up to 400 hours every year. That's enough to watch 160 movies or take 40 flights from Tokyo to San Francisco. One solution to cut down on commute time is the bullet train, which travels at 180 miles per hour. Now, private cars and parking problems. Despite their excellent public transportation system, many Japanese have their own cars. As car ownership has increased, so have major traffic jams and parking problems. Parking is such a problem in Tokyo that the city has strict rules about car ownership. You cannot own a car unless you can prove you have a place off the street to park it. And here in this picture, you see one of the ways they get their cars if they need to leave the shopping mall. You have this contraption which rises up, grabs your car, brings it back down, and then off you go. Creating new land. The Japanese have created land. For example, they have filled in shallow wetlands with dirt and rubble. Wetlands is land that is saturated with water, not very useful. So they fill these areas with dirt and rubble, and they try and build something on it. Much of Tokyo is built on filled-in bays and marshes. Filling wetlands can save farmland from being used for buildings. The Japanese also create new land for farming by cutting terraces or areas of flat land into hillsides or mountains. Terracing allows farmers to grow rice. So these are some of the things that the Japanese have figured out how to do in a very densely populated and in a very limited region. And they've gotten creative. They've done things like building shopping malls underground, subways underground, and they have some amazing new hotel innovations. And I'm going to show you some videos, so keep an eye on my website, and I'll have these things uploaded. And this concludes the brief overview of Japanese history and some of their solutions to solving their population density issues.